Hi everyone, welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate. Welcome back to another episode of Special Education Advocacy with Ashley Barlow. I'm Ashley Barlow, and I am so happy you're here. And we're not only at another episode, we are at our 200th episode. Friends, I just can't believe it. I can't believe that we've gotten this. You've probably heard me say that Ashley Barlow Company was really kind of founded on the idea of a podcast, hilariously during the viewing of Frozen 2, which I consider to be one of the worst movies in the entire universe. And we're here. We made it to 200 episodes. I am so grateful for your support, for all of your feedback, for your friendship. In the case of a lot of you, I have made so many new friends, learned so much in this opportunity. I've had an opportunity to express a creative outlet, to dive a little bit further into research in some cases, to connect with so many wonderful friends, and to get to know so many of you and to get to know the stories of so many of your children. And that's really the heart and soul of special education. So I'm so grateful for this opportunity and excited to celebrate with you. Let's dive in. The format of this episode is we are going to do several questions that you have submitted. Some of those you submitted electronically via something called SpeakPipe. And so we'll get to hear your actual voices. Some of those were email and some of them were direct messages on Instagram. So I've got some stuff printed off from questions that you sent in ways other than using your voice. We're going to start with one of those. We'll flip over to some of the speak pipes where we get to actually hear your voices, and we'll kind of flip back and forth. The first question is something that is really kind of near and dear to my heart because I think we can all identify with this as advocates. So our first question is an advocacy question. And this comes from, I think this one was on Instagram. It says, how does one learn everything they need to learn to handle the questions? I have studied ed law through a program with our local school. I have listened to about 90% of your podcasts. I have read a ton, have a Wright's Law book, and just keep getting stumped as if I know nothing. I get that I am new on this journey, but are there ways to quickly reference questions like the one above? And I'll tell you what, this is something that I hear all the time. In fact, I always say that special education advocates think they need to go to law school, and special education attorneys think that they need a master's in special education. And parents are like, I am overwhelmed altogether. If I remember correctly, this is from someone who is a parent and a new advocate. And here's the thing. Yeah, we all feel that way. I think it's really exciting. In fact, this question is the reason why I went to law school, and I'm going to talk to you about that here in a second. But I understand that to a lot of people, special education can be overwhelming, it can be extremely taxing, and it can be incredibly intimidating. So the thing that I want for you to hear first is we are all in the same boat. And if you look at this, if you do a little framework shift and you look at this as if it's an opportunity to learn a lot more, I think you're going to be a lot more confident. So let me tell you, none of us know everything. I am looking straight ahead at my bookcase, which has books about behavior, books about speech, books about OT, books about PT, books about special education practice, you name it. We have so much information that is basically right at our fingertips. that we don't have to memorize everything. We don't have to know everything. And so please give yourself a break. Literally, the reason I went to law school was to get smarter. And I mean, I've said this 100 times. I did not like teaching. I loved teaching. I did not like the bureaucracy of the system of education. And I knew that about 3 days in to being a teacher. And it really surprised me. It caught me off guard. And after 3 years in the classroom, I said, you know what? I'm going to go to law school. I don't really know what I want to do, but I'm going to go to law school, and at least I'm going to get smarter, and I'm going to be able to help bring people together. And this idea of bringing people together was really kind of like why I took the journey to go to law school. Now, it didn't take me long in law school to realize that I wanted a career in the law that allowed me to keep learning. I remember very vividly sitting at a mediation with my dad, who was an attorney during law school, and he said something about what happened when somebody was 62 and a half. Well, they're close to 62 and a half. We've got another 18 months or something. And I was like, hold on a second. And of course, if you're a grown-up, you probably know that had to do with the age at which they could take or had to take some kind of retirement distribution. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. I want to learn more about that. And so I asked a bunch of questions, and I probably hopped on the internet and researched a little bit more, and I learned about retirement distributions. There's always something else to learn. And in this wild world of special education advocacy, there's a lot to learn. And so it's a long-winded way of saying there is so much to learn. Now, the one thing to answer, I did make a couple of notes. The one thing that I did want to tell you is if you're looking for like a super quick fix, I do use ChatGPT. I have a lot of clients that come to me that have diagnoses that I've never heard of. They have therapies I've never heard of. They take medications I've never heard of. They use acronyms that I haven't ever heard of. And I will hop on ChatGPT, which just helps me kind of get like the idea of what I'm trying to search. I also just sometimes Google stuff. So an example I have that's out of the special education world is right now I'm sending a kid, I've got a high school senior. And so we're trying to figure out admissions, tuition, scholarship, all the various kinds of aid, the FAFSA, all of that stuff. And I had a huge question about one of those things as it kind of vis-a-vis actually being a small business owner. And I talked to a few friends, and one friend connected me to a Facebook group, which told me the question. So I talked to probably 4 or 5 friends, and it took me like 15 minutes to explain my question. I got to this Facebook group, and the Facebook group told me what my question was. It's literally an acronym. How do I blah, blah, blah with this acronym? And now I have like a 30-second question that I can Google, that I can look for on podcasts, that I can look for in books, etc., etc. So sometimes it's a matter of connecting to really figure out what your question is. I start with Google or ChatGPT, and then I do my research from there. Okay, my second piece of advice is kind of a Curdy methodology. My dad's name is Kurt, and the kids call him Curdy. And Curdy's favorite song is a Jimmy Buffett song called I Love the Now. And I'll tell you what, if there is an advocacy strategy that is better than this, I don't know what it is. Focus on the now. We can go down these crazy rabbit holes. We can spiral and spiral. And that is totally normal. I want for you to know that is totally normal. Having chronic pain myself, I know that we can, so because we have struggled so much in advocating for our kids, because you might have a child with dyslexia and you might really struggle to get that child eligible for special education services. You might have a child with chronic health conditions, and you might constantly be on edge and worried that a flare of symptoms is going to come. You might have a child that had an acute illness that could come back. And so you might, get that anxiety regarding upcoming scans or something like that. Or you might have a child with a developmental disability that, kind of like we get ebbs and flows of different impacts of that developmental disability. Wherever you are, you probably have something that comes up and is like, wah, this could happen. Wah, that could happen. And my strategy with that is to focus on the now. What is our acute problem right now and how do we fix it? And then to look at it in terms of the longer impact or the wider impact. So number one, focus on the now. You can deepen your understanding of additional questions later. But for right now, focus on what the issue is now. Number two, learn from every experience. And those are experiences of yourself and your friends. So what happened in first grade? What happened with this kind of teacher? What happened with this curriculum? What do we know that happened? And then learn how to communicate about those things. So what did we have happen in the past? And how can we learn from that? And then the real magic is, how do I communicate that so I can collaborate with the team and not just sound like a Debbie Downer, like, nope, that's not going to work because we tried that in first grade. So, the way that you can kind of think of this is like a puzzle piece, like, well, we know from experience that this works, or we know from experience that that works. Of course, you have to be flexible, right? Like, I used to always say, Jack does not work for external rewards. Well, all of a sudden now he works for external rewards, right? Like things change. And then the third thing is get comfortable with not knowing. The most important thing that any person can do is ask questions. I think one of the most important, I don't know if I think it's the most, but one of the most important characteristics in a leader is humility. And we have to have humility to ask questions. So if you're in a meeting and you get stuck, ask a question. Be like, time out, hang on. Can I ask a question? Can I clarify? Can I just see where we are? I can't tell you how many meetings I'm in where parents don't even know what page we're on in a document. Stop and ask questions. Nobody is expected to know everything, and that includes you. So get comfortable with not knowing. Now, if you still are like, I want to know more, I suggest that you go to a college bookstore and that you buy, I say we need to know 3 things in special education advocacy. We need to know the law, we need to know special education practice, and 3, we need to know the negotiation strategies to get there. So I suggest that you say, may I please have 1 or 2 books that you sell for the classes on special education law, number 1. On special education practice, number 2. In teacher talk, they call that the methods class, the special education methods class. That's number 2. And maybe a law school book on negotiation or advocacy strategy. I talk about books a lot here, so you can also go back through and learn some books. Okay, I hope that helps you with question number 1. Okay, we are moving on to question number 2. Question number 2 also comes to us by a question that was emailed to me, or I think this one might have been direct messaged. But let's hop right in. What happens if your district can't meet the needs of your child, parentheses, like a one-on-one aid? And it says, I should note that we'd rather not be in district anyway. I would prefer a neighboring district, but I can't move right now. Okay, so I think there's kind of 2 things in this question. The first thing is, what happens when a district can't meet your child's needs? And the answer is, your child is entitled to a free, appropriate public education, and whatever is appropriate should be covered by the IEP team. So if the district cannot meet your child's needs, then you have to go down that continuum of placements in order to get your child to the correct placement option. Now, if they can't meet your needs because their system isn't set up, correctly, you might not need a more restrictive or a less restrictive setting. You might need the same setting, the same educational placement that your child has now, but you might have to go to another district or another kind of school in order to get what they have. Sometimes this happens this happens a lot with all kinds of accessibility things. So, maybe your building doesn't have what your child needs because of some kind of physical impairment that your child has, etc. Not only mobility, but a really easy example is if, the school somehow lacks the ability to transport your child or to make all of the floors to the building accessible to your child. Now you run into ADA and 504 stuff with that, but the fact of the matter is we can't get elevators installed in schools to the extent that they aren't, which is horrible. But we can't do that in 4 days, and sometimes schools just simply can't do it. And so we might have to go to a different building. This also happens a fair amount for students with vision impairments, because there's something in like an older building where it's simply not safe for a child to access the building safely, and the child doesn't need a super restrictive educational placement, and so we might have to access a different building for that reason. Right, wrong, or indifferent on the oh, that's terrible, why can't they make the building accessible? What we want is we want kids to be as independent as possible in the least restrictive environment that is appropriate for them. And so sometimes IEP teams, I would hope led by the parents, make the decision to go to a different building in order to access something that a different building has to offer. And I think that could be really wild and exciting too, right? It might be a child that really benefits from aquatic therapy, and the school district has an aquatic therapist that works at one school, and the kid can go every single day to access a pool that's at a different building, and your building doesn't have a pool. It could be anything, right? So I've never seen that. I've never heard of it, but I just thought of it because swimming is our world, and I would love aquatic therapy at school. Is that something that we could do? So that is the really quick answer. But since you brought up the issue of a one-on-one, I want to read the question again. What happens if your district cannot meet the needs of your child? Parentheses, like a one-on-one aid. So the only reason that a district could not provide a one-on-one aid would be A, if they can't afford it, or B, if they cannot hire anybody. It is infeasible to hire someone because there is no pool, or because of some other reason like that. And, pool of teachers, we just talked about an aquatic pool. Now I'm talking about that there is no lot of aids from which to pool, they cannot hire anybody. And teacher shortages are a significant issue, and that probably comes back a lot to the bureaucracy of teacher pay and the pay of the aides. Not something that we can fix, right? We can certainly work to fix it, but one person isn't going to fix that for one child that's on an IEP, and that's a legislative issue. So I think the easiest answer here is to go back to interest-based negotiation. I talk about this a lot in my negotiation workshop. We have to look at the why behind the school's position that they cannot provide a service or a support, in this case, an aid. And so let's just assume that it's the most popular thing, that they can't afford it. That's okay. We, as part of the team, have the opportunity to help them strategize around that. So if, you can suspect strongly, or if you can get to we just simply don't have the budget dollars, maybe you don't need an aid all day. Maybe you can share an aid with somebody else. Maybe you can, and it's wise to go to a different school where the funding is allocated differently. So we have to get to the reason why they can't support and aid. Sometimes it is that they don't want a slippery slope, right? Like some parent in the class ahead of you or 2 classes ahead of you asked for the service that you're asking for, and it was completely unfounded and it was ridiculous. But this person is just going to go berserk if they know that you got it. Well, then what we can do is we can cheerlead and empower and say, that's not our problem, but we can do this politely, right? Like, we are fully aware that if you give this to us, so-and-so is going to get chirpy and your school board meeting is going to be exciting. And listen, we believe in you as leaders. We believe in you as cheerleaders, and we believe that you're going to do the right thing. Sometimes we have to call it out in order to get what we need. In your case, it sounds like it's financial. I'm just reading between the lines here, cannot do it. And so, I think calling out that interest and helping them kind of work around that interest and work on reallocating the staff that they have now could be super duper helpful. I have a child that didn't need much help, but needed some executive functioning help in my schedule. And we worked around and around and around. Actually, I have several kids where we've done this. I don't know why I'm talking about one, but I have several kids where I've done this, where I just literally have an adult check in at the beginning of certain lessons or certain class periods if the child's old enough to get them started, right? And once they get old enough, then that can turn into peer support in some cases. So I hope that helps. That is the answer to number 2.
Hey, Ashley, it's April from Rise Educational Advocacy. Here is my question for your 200th episode. If you could talk to your younger self as a special education attorney, what would you say? What would you do differently? Or what would you do exactly the same?
Okay, number 3. April, thank you so much. You know that humility is so important in this field, in life in general. And yeah, there's always a lesson to be learned. I think the first thing that I would say to myself is, calm down, sassy pants. They know. They know. When I very first started off in this field, I got so excited about what I knew and how I thought I could help that I really kind of, I would come into meetings guns a-blazing, so excited, and I would explain stuff to teams that already knew the content matter. I would come in and I would drone on and on, excitedly, no doubt, about sensory processing or about behavior supports or about the functions of behavior, and the teams already knew. And I should have been spending a lot more time on the collaborative nuances of supporting the children instead of mansplaining everything to the teams. It took a lot of experience for me to figure out the nuance between how to explain things from my clients' perspectives and then how to collaborate with the teams from a foundation of knowledge that they already had. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would explain to myself. Now, not everybody has my excitable research diving kind of personality. And so I'll give you some more thoughts on that. As I said in the answer to question 1, I really think it's important for families to balance their knowledge of special education law, special education advocacy strategy, negotiation strategy, and special education practice. And so to the extent that you feel weak in one of those, I would definitely get more information about those things. We've got tons here at Ashley Barlow Company to support you. I might suggest starting off with the lab or downloading some of our PDFs. Of course, there's tons of information at Wright's Law. April Rurig, who posted this question, has a ton over at her business as well. Find some resources that talk to you and get that information. Another thing that I wish, I've got the course, the ABC course that trains advocates. And so if I look at this from an advocacy perspective, I train a lot of advocates. I do mentoring for advocates on the side. Not on the side, I mean, it's just part of my business here at Ashley Barlow Company. And something that I work on with them a lot is setting goals. This is probably just an entrepreneurship thing, but I did not set business goals and I did not work as like a business developer very well when I started either of my businesses. When I graduated from law school, I started as kind of like a paralegal secretary for my dad. I managed his rental properties. I helped him with his law practice. I took a couple of clients and I hit the ground running. And I didn't stop to implement systems and strategies to track my time I had to track my time, but to track like my times vis-a-vis goals. How many hours did I want to bill per week, per month, per year? What kind of income did I want to earn? I didn't do any of that. And I think that that's super important. So just as we do for our students in special education, in business, it's important that we set goals and we monitor our progress. And then finally, I wish I could say to myself, and I think I'm pretty good at this, but I think it's a good reminder, follow your heart. If there's one thing I know about special education advocacy, I know that the real magic happens when you look at the objective information that's in the law, when you look at the objective information that is research, evidence-based, best practice, and special education practice. And when you marry that with the subjective matter that's in your heart, you're knowing as a parent, you're knowing as someone that loves students with disabilities, you're knowing as a human. When you can marry those things, that's where the real magic happens.
Hi, Ashley. My name's Faith. My son is 3 and he's autistic. He qualifies for occupational and physical therapy through the local school district, but I want to keep him home another year. However, I do think he would really benefit from those therapies. My sister-in-law says that they do offer walk-in therapy for speech therapy. She's not sure about physical and occupational. Do you have any experience with walk-in services with school districts? What are my rights? Is there anything I can do since they do offer walk-in speech services to ensure that everything goes smoothly?
Hi, Faith. Thank you so much for your question. And, I think this is a really important question. Actually, the weekend before this episode airs, I am doing a conference here in Northern Kentucky for a school district that is a Catholic school district, and we're talking about special education supports because I think that there is a trend in private schools in trying to meet the needs of children with disabilities. And, I think really kind of the trend is in trying to accept and admit children with disabilities, but then teachers who haven't had a ton of kids that learn differently in their classes are really struggling to meet their needs. And so I'm happy that you asked this because I think it is a big, important question. So the first part of my answer is check your state's regulations. There is a provision in IDEA, and then most states tease this out further in their regs, I would imagine. I just looked at Kentucky's regs for a different Catholic school system in my area or in my state. And in Kentucky, most of the information on students placed in private schools is in simply one regulation, which is kind of exciting. So, but let's talk about what IDEA says, what the federal law says. So the federal law says that students that are in private schools have to get a proportionate share of funding if they're in private schools. So public districts have to spend a proportionate share of the federal funds they get on students that are placed in private schools, and they have to get equitable services. So it doesn't mandate those itinerant services. It doesn't mandate that speech and OT and PT and music therapy and special education go to the private school. A lot of schools do that because it's honestly cheaper to just send their teachers over to a private school, especially if they're going to see more than one. But you'll also see where they say, yeah, sure, you can come for speech, but it's, our hole in the day is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you've got to figure out transportation to and from. And they might say, well, the funding would become disproportionate if we provided transportation or whatever. So you're kind of at their mercy is what I'm saying, because the funding has to be proportionate. But I certainly see it work, and I certainly see it work effectively. So first of all, it has to be proportionate. Second of all, it has to be equitable. Everything gets written down into something called a service plan. Even in states, I used to practice law in Ohio. I practice law in Kentucky. I advocate for students in several states. And even in various states, you'll hear that service plan called a different acronym: district to district, school to school, place to place. So if you aren't sure what somebody's talking about, always ask, like, oh, is that the service plan that my child gets because they're in a private school? And then just remember that you don't get a guarantee of the specific services. So it's not like you always get speech, or you always get PT, or you always get OT. So good luck. I mean, if I were considering that myself, like there's, pluses and minuses to both. So I might make like a pros and cons list or something. And I do always say I wish I had placed Jack in a private preschool before he went to kindergarten, because I think if I had found like the perfect, our preschool experience was flat, if not negative, and it certainly did not help us in any regard with our very highly anticipated kindergarten placement dispute. And I think if I had found a private preschool that could have done a good job at supporting him inclusively, and I went and observed 20 of them. So suffice it to say, I couldn't find one, or they were all full. But if I had found one, I think it would have very much strengthened our argument for inclusion in kindergarten. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, let's flip back over to questions that I have printed out. And this one says, thank you for taking questions. You are so welcome. As a parent of a child that is just beginning her school journey, how do we evaluate which school district is the best place for our child based on their needs, assuming that we have the means to move and assuming private would not be an option? I love this question. I am asked this question a lot. I have recommended 2 times in the last 18 years that somebody actually move districts for special education services. I am relentlessly optimistic, and I truly believe that being in our communities promotes a sense of belonging, and it's really truly a sense of belonging that is the most important thing especially for our kids on IEPs. However, there have been 2 times in my practice where I've been like, you know what, I just don't think these people are going to get it. And I think it is so important that you move. Now, that said, there are a lot of families that move for a lot of reasons other than insufficient special education supports. It could be work, it could be climate, it could be health, it could be family, it could be any number of reasons. And so I am asked this question a lot by friends, by clients, by people that are referred from organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, for me, this answer, the first answer is to really come up with a list of things that your child needs. It could be environmental, but also it could be more like global, right? So think future forward. Think about the community where your child's going to live and work independently and drive and grow and all of those things. Think about your family's values by way of the environment. Are your family values centered around, a super safe little suburban community where they can ride their bike to baseball practice? Or are you looking for a more busy, hopping, exciting urban community where your child can walk 2 blocks and be at an incredible museum, or go to the library, et cetera, et cetera? So I think those things are important to look at first, kind of the global, future forward and family value interests. And then I think it's also important to look at the community of the schools. So just like when you're looking for a doctor, it's really reassuring when you know that a doctor has had multiple patients that have had issues or even values that are similar to yours. And so, if your child uses a communication device or app that is unique, if your child has a medical condition that requires certain care, if your child has, if you use a behavior support strategy that is unique and not super widely utilized, it's very helpful to go where the school district has supported children with similar needs or children that use similar supports. And I think that's pretty widely known. Of course, from my perspective, another thing that I recommend that people ask the district very deliberately is the questions about inclusion. So, and remember that I always say, I don't really care so much about your diagnosis, but I care about how that diagnosis impacts your child. So what's autism look like in your child? What does Down syndrome look like in your child? What does CP look like in your child? What does executive functioning disorder look like in your child? And then you're going to ask questions that really kind of more go to their approach. So if you say, well, how many kids with Down syndrome are in inclusive environments? Nobody can answer that. Nobody can answer that. That is, what is an inclusive environment? We can't tell you how many kids have Down syndrome. What's the difference between kindergarten and 12th grade placement? That you aren't going to get much from that. But you really want to know about their kind of general approach and their general attitude towards inclusion. And so, ask questions to get to that. I also would definitely ask about what supplementary aids and services are available. Are there children that utilize AAC devices as their primary means of communication? If it's, a reading thing, how many, or do you have a fair amount, a reasonable amount of people that are trained in an evidence-based reading intervention? What is your tier 1, your whole group reading instruction at these grade levels? Those kinds of questions to really kind of get to the idea of the pathway. And in this case, I think it's super important to explain any struggles or frustrations that you've had at previous districts, knowing that you don't want to taint the waters. So if it's reading, you might say, my child has dyslexia and she's in 4th grade and she has really struggled to read. And in fact, kind of across the board, it looks like she's reading at about a 1st grade level. And something that I've really tried to advocate for is a multisensory, research-based, blah, 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 all the elements to science of reading and Orton Gillingham type instruction. Is that something that you provide? And then, wait for their answer. And then professional development is a good question to ask. What kinds of PTs have your people gone to? How big is your staff? Asking the staffing question. Obviously, you can ask about behavior supports. You can ask about related services. Let's see, what else do I have on my list over here? yeah, student to teacher ratio, I put that on the list. So I hope that helps. I was getting long-winded, so let's stop it there.
Hey, Ashley. So I too have a child that has Down syndrome. She is just starting first grade, and she did do kindergarten twice. So we've been using, the science of reading, specifically an OG methodology to work on reading with my daughter, and she has shown so much growth since we have started implementing that. But one area she has not been showing growth at school or at home, is in math. And so I'm curious, are there any research-based methods that are really beneficial to children that have a profile similar to a child that has Down syndrome? That way I could look into it, and then maybe like some verbiage or suggestions of what I could bring to the IEP table as suggestions to open up that conversation. So love your show, and thank you so much for everything that you do.
Hi, Kristen. Thank you so much for your question about math. I will first lament that, yes, I wish there were more questions or more curricula that were research and evidence-based and widely known and purchased by districts to help students that struggle with math, that have developmental disabilities, and that need multisensory math instruction. There are frankly there's not a list that is like super widely known. And I think one of the reasons that is because there's so much research and there's so much of a push and a like awareness, outreach, research for specific learning disabilities and reading. And so that dyslexia community has really like pushed the envelope a lot and helped us with a lot of forward progress and reading, which is awesome. That said, I think the quick answer to your question is, do you know about Touch Math? Touch Math is a math program that basically so every number gets a dot. So 1 gets 1 dot, 2 gets 2 dots, 3 gets 3 dots, and they kind of go like on the edges of the numbers. And I've always been of the understanding, I haven't looked this up in a long time, but I think it's true that the Arabic numbers that we use here in America are the shapes that they are because they have that many like natural stops. So like the 2 has a beginning and an end. The 3 has 3 dots because we start here, we go around, stop, and we go around, stop, and that's 3. And then eventually students will hopefully start to see that the number correlates to an amount of dots, kind of like when you roll a die. So if you roll a die and you see the 6, that 2, 2, 2 is a 6, and eventually we don't have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dots. You just know that you rolled a 6 because you memorize the shape of those dots. So Touch Math, in theory, we memorize the number of dots because we memorize the shape of the dots associated with the number, and then math becomes more automatic. So one of the goals with reading and math is that automaticity. And so if we can get kind of to memorize and we can capitalize on the visual profile or the kinesthetic profile of a child and their relative strengths in those areas, then maybe we can get there. So with Touchpoints Math, you kind of look at the corresponding number of dots and students manipulate those visually, kinesthetically, etc. Touchpoints Math, has a money component. It has addition, subtraction, 2-digit addition. I mean, it goes pretty far, and it's really wild to see it when it works successfully. So that's the one that I think most people are familiar with. There's also a program called Making Math Read. I actually have a list, so I'm going from a list. If you're watching me, I'm scrolling. Making Math Real is another one that I've had a few students learn on. It's also multisensory. It also, therefore includes all of the senses, the auditory, the visual, the kinesthetic, etc. And it's also, pretty widely used. So you might look into that. I have had students use other ones called Wright Start and On Cloud. I don't know much about either of those. And then there's a woman named Marilyn Zecher, Zecher, who has a program called Multisensory Math, MSM. And I do know one district up here that uses that. Then on my list, I have Numicon, Singapore, and Singapore Math also at the bottom. I don't know specifically that I know anybody that's used those. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't done research on any of those, but this is what's in a Word doc in my IEP binder that I will research if a math issue comes up. So that's an incomprehensive list. I think you're going down the right path. But before you look at any of those, I would definitely look them up and look at the research and see what you think about using those for your child.
I've heard you mention letterboarding in passing on a couple of occasions on the podcast. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on letterboarding or spelling to communicate.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for this question. So let's explain what letterboarding is to people. And I might not give I'm doing this with zero research and pure experience. So letterboarding is a form of communication that folks use that involves a letterboard. A letterboard is a laminated piece of paper, probably not even have to be laminated, a board, a computer screen that has the alphabet as well as some additional symbols. And the person simply spells, or the verb I think that's most used is spells, but almost like types in order to communicate. It's often done with a communication partner. And so what it might look like is the communication partner holds up like a laminated piece of paper that might look like the alphabet to an unfamiliar observer. And then the person that is letterboarding spells in order to communicate. So they might spell, like if they're spelling, I enjoy riding bikes, they would kind of hit the I and then a space. And so the communication partner would say I, and then enjoy would be ENJOY, and the communication partner would articulate each of those letters, and then at the end say enjoy when the person that is spelling hits the space bar. And you would go on that until the communication partner saw the entire sentence and then said, I enjoy riding bikes. And then the communication would go on from there. It can be high tech, so people can do it independently with like a keyboard, and then it'll connect to an AAC device, like an electronic one that will do what the communication partner does, only it's a computer. Like I've seen it done a lot with an iPad that has the voice that kind of spits out. This is getting to be more common for students that are non-speaking and students with apraxia who, might have a fair amount of words, but it's looking like there's this like mind-body disconnect with apraxia that happens. And it seems as though most folks that do letterboarding are exploring the idea that when students or people letterboard, you're getting a more authentic voice than when people use their expressive language. So, it might be tied to a behavior. Like, let me think of an example. There's this story in Cincinnati of the mom of a young man, he's a young adult that has autism, is Jen Jordan. She's on our local radio station Q102, and her son has a fair amount of expressive language. I think, I don't know them, but I follow their story online. Okay. And he was a very restrictive eater, super restrictive diet. And in letterboarding, he was able to communicate to his mom that he wanted to eat more foods and he wanted to try more foods. And he has, and it's very interesting to watch the videos that she posts online. He has a Facebook page called Cards by Jacob, and he's an incredible artist, and he sells greeting cards. And so you can watch some of their story there. But she is of the opinion that he is more authentic in talking about his food preferences when he is letterboarding as opposed to when he's using expressive language. So like he'll say, I don't like it expressively, and he'll be like just shoveling in bites of food. Okay, so that is a 4.5 minute explanation before I answer your question, Adam. Thanks for bearing with me. And I hope that that was a fair response. The reason why it was fair and why I paused a little bit is because letterboarding has become controversial. I'm not quite sure why it's controversial. So the quick answer that I can say is I support all forms of communication that work for people. I have had a few students that in my caseload who letterboard is a form of communication, and I find it to be extremely effective. I think that it is really, really great and interesting. I first became familiar with letterboarding several years ago. I watched the documentary called Far from the Tree. And oh my gosh, they told the story of this family that letterboarded, and I just burst into tears. I then bought the book that upon which the documentary was based. The book, I wish it was over in my bookshelves because I might even go grab it. It is like super duper thick, but it tells the story of families that are living with at least one family member whose apple fell far from the tree, who was different than the other people in their families. And it's just interesting. It's a little old, and so some of the things were harder to read for me because of language that was used and that kind of thing, but it was very interesting. So now, the like company line on letterboarding, I suppose, is that it is not supported by OSHA because there's not enough evidence to support it as a form of communication. But it, to me, in my experience and with a lot of friends and clients, it works, and we should give people a voice no matter how. And like for me, if it works, it's good, right? So I am pretty uninhibited by way of stuff like that. The one thing I will say is a lot of schools will say, well, we won't write a goal around it because we can't write goals around things that are not research-based, which cracks me up because there's a ton of schools that do all kinds of wacky stuff. But you'll have good districts that are like, yes, sure, we will support a child that uses letterboarding, and we have a communication partner who is good at it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, we won't write goals around it. Great, fine. That is totally fine with me. If that's what you have to do in order to get it to be supported, then thumbs up. So to me, all good. Adam, if you want to continue this conversation, I'm happy to do it. I kind of felt like I was in the hot seat.
Hey, Ashley. Congratulations on 200 episodes. That is truly an incredible milestone. The question I have for you is, which episode or maybe guest was the most personally impacting for you as a mom? Or maybe if nothing comes to mind for that, like what have you distinctly learned through the 200 episodes that you've created of the podcast? Again, congratulations, and I can't wait to celebrate with you.
Oh, Kara, you blow me away with your ability to make me insightful. I am so grateful for this question. This is the one that made me reflect the most, and I really appreciate it. So I've kept a note on my desk since you sent this in a few weeks ago and I really kind of brainstormed. I literally scrolled through everything on the website, and then I have a list, an Excel spreadsheet over here of all of the podcasts. And I have whittled this down. The list used to be very, very long. And then I was like, if I mention everybody except for like 6 people, then those 6 people are going to feel great. And so, gosh, I mean, that's the whole point, is that every episode has been my favorite. I think the one that I felt like the nerdiest and the most excited about was Pete Wright. Pete has a level of excitement that is unmatched. To go to Pete's trainings is transformational. To be in Pete's circle is just like, absolutely positively incredible. And, and by in his circle, I mean to do work that is parallel to Pete's. And so, like, having idolized Pete and Pam Wright for so long, and then to have them on the podcast was just such an incredible honor. The other thing that's incredible about Pete is you can ask him a question about something pretty nuanced in the law, and that guy's head is like a Rolodex. I mean, he can spit out case names, years of cases, fact situations and cases, and recall information in this really admirably incredible and efficient way. And that's something that I not only appreciate about Pete, but something that I try not to abuse this, but I do call him a couple of times a year and say, hey, Pete, can I ask you a question? Because he can save anybody hours of time with the stuff that he can remember. So for me, that was like the one where I was the most awestruck. I also was awestruck by Heather Avis. When I started Ashley Barlow Company, I did not know Heather personally. And so, she is the person that literally is and, we have so much to give Heather, so much gratitude to give to her, so much respect to give to her for that outreach and that awareness. And, that's so outreach and awareness are so important in any marginalized population. And so that's the other one where I was like, you would have thought I was meeting like some celebrity. And in the Down syndrome community, Heather Avis is a celebrity. I also, by way of long podcasts is what I was going to say, but like informational podcasts, the one that I thought was, one of the best, like one that stuck out to me, unsurprisingly, actually came by way of a mistake. So in our very first conference, we had Daphne Corder presenting on dyslexia. And Daphne knows so much about dyslexia. She is a personal friend of mine. She lives in Texas. She is an advocate there, and beyond anything, like Daphne is a change maker. Daphne is so impactful in the Down syndrome community that still in my phone, her name is Daphne Dyslexia. The first time I met her, I was like, that's a girl I need to ask questions of. And if I ever went to like be a part of policy change for the SLD community in Kentucky, she's my number one call. Now we're friends. And I've still never changed her name to Daphne Corder in my phone, because Daphne Dyslexia is, with no disrespect to Jay, her husband, who is amazing, Daphne Dyslexia is like who she is to me. And so Daphne was supposed to present. She gave us like 3 hours of, no, it wasn't that long, but the video that she sent in to present was super long. And I was like, you know what, let's just play it. And to the people that miss out on the next section, then we'll just give them an hour for free or something. We'll figure it out. And unfortunately, we went to play it and the audio only worked for like 12 minutes. It was the weirdest thing. We tried and tried and tried. It worked on our end. We tried to even screen record it and we could not get the audio to load to give it to the people that wanted it. And they, after 12 minutes, were like, we want this information. So I was like, well, let's just have her on the podcast. So I invited her on the podcast. She and I got to talking and we talked for like an hour and 45 minutes. I mean, that girl knows dyslexia inside and out, upside down, left to right, right to left, top to bottom. And oh my gosh, she was just knocking my socks off. So we kept talking. You know, I aim for like 35 to 45 minute episodes. And we kept talking and I ended up doing a 3-part episode called All About Dyslexia. And not only do I know that you all loved it because I can tell that you're still downloading it, but I learned so much and I was just so impressed by the way that she could boil down so much content and research into bite-sized stuff. So that Daphne Quarter episode really kind of blew me away to the point that we made it 3 episodes. And we don't have any other 3-episode podcasts. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is the friendships. So yours, Kara, you guys, Kara's over at the Special Needs Mom podcast. We were connected by not only one of my sorority sisters, but my little in my sorority, Jenna Anderson. Jenna has this incredible giving heart. And when I started Ashley Barlow Company, Jenna said, you've got to meet my friend Kara. They were in the same community out in Southern California, and Jenna has since moved. And she said, you've got to meet my friend Kara. She's doing something similar. Kara is, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Kara, but my understanding, Kara had a different career actually in landscape architecture and landscape design. And Kara became a life coach in order to help folks navigate the wild and crazy world of special needs parenting. And Kara's son, Levi, had a brain tumor and then it recurred. And so Kara has, navigated illness and then all of the things that are attendant to his forthcoming disability. And she's done it with such grace, but also such intuition. And as I said at the beginning of this question, Kara was just so impactful in kind of my self-realizations about parenting Jack. And so I am so grateful for your friendship, Kara, and for this question. And another example of those friendships are this little group that we put together. This is a weird world where we market on social media and through email lists. And entrepreneurship is a nut for the faint of heart. And so I pulled together a group of ladies that I admire and people that I have picked ideas from or sought advice from. And we call ourselves the BABO, the Bad Business Women. What are we? BABO. Badass business owners, I bet you, is what we are. And we meet monthly. And so I'm not going to call you guys out, but well, sure, I will. It is, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to tell you. I want it to be a mystery. But the BABO group, half the time we're talking about how much we love Taylor Swift or how colicky our babies are or were. And half the time we're talking about really, really good business insight and we're just supporting one another. And that's what it's all about. So thank you, Kara, for letting me highlight a few of my episodes and more importantly, having me go back and look at them. Okay, friends, that's a wrap on episode 200. Episode 1 was published on September 8th. 2022. We are therefore 105 weeks into the Special Education Advocacy podcast with Ashley Barlow. It has been such a joy to be here with you and to be here for you. I am very much looking forward to our continued work. We've got some amazing stuff coming down the pike here at Ashley Barlow Company. It's no longer a tease. I am working on some video series for you that will be much, much shorter, much, much easier for you to access, even more affordable. I'm stealing away chunks of time to work on everything for them, and they will be ready for you in the fall or early winter of 2024, hopefully not 2025, simply depending on how busy I am at my law practice and with my very busy children. And I'm just really excited to bring this to you. Thank you to you for continuing to follow along and to support me in this business. The podcast is entirely free. I don't monetize the podcast at all. It is really an opportunity for me to connect with other professionals and then, more importantly, to get information out to you about special education advocacy. I am so happy for your support, and I'm so happy to show up here week after week for you. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.